everyone, we're still in section 4.1. This is the last part of this series. So I'm on page 332. Okay, so just a few more things to kind of talk about. So now I want to talk about how you kind of relate linear equations with graphs and kind of what ordered pairs have to do with all this. So ordered pairs are actually what create a graph. And we have been using graphs over and over, but I want to really now focus on one very big skill with graphs. So here is kind of what I'm trying to get at. So here's the graph for y equals x plus 3. I want to find 3 ordered pairs on this graph and confirm that they actually work in the equation. So I want to kind of understand this whole relationship now between graphs and figuring out what goes in here. So let's start with, how about just I'm going to just choose 3 points that I can easily read. So I'm going to use this point right here. So what is this point? This is the point 0, 3. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to take a second to see if this will actually work. So if I plug in the points here, this would be 3 equals 0 plus 3. Yeah, that definitely works, right? Okay, so that's the first one. So now let's do another one. Let's see, how about down here? We'll just continue on because I can easily read this point. So this is the point -1, 2. Okay, so let's see if this actually works. So this would tell me then that 2 equals -1 plus 3. Is that true? Yep, definitely true, right? All right, so let's just choose one last point. So how about this one here? Okay, so this is the point, let's see, this is -2, 1. So this would tell me then that 1 equals -2 plus 3, and that is also true. So that's kind of what I'm looking for here. So I want you to try that now in example 8. So just look for 3 points that you can actually identify. You might have to try a little bit harder with this one. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so to start here, I can definitely read this point here. So I'm going to start with this one. So this is the point -1, 1. So now I've got to plug this into the equation. So this is -1 equals 2 minus 1 squared. Oh, no, wait, sorry. I'm doing that all wrong, aren't I? It's 1 equals 2 minus -1 squared. Now here's the one thing I want to point out to you. Anytime you plug something in, you want to make sure you've got parentheses around it. This matters a lot when you are squaring something, right? So when I square a negative that has parentheses around it, this will become positive. So what this really becomes is 1 equals 2 minus 1 after I square that. And 2 minus 1 is indeed equal to 1, so we're good to go. Okay, so now let's move on to, I can definitely read this point here. So this is the point 0, 2. So let's see if this works. So it says 2 equals 2 minus 0 squared. So that would be 2 minus 0. So that definitely works. And then let's just do one more. So I can read this point. So I'm going to choose this one. So this is the point now 1, 1. So this would say that 1 equals 2 minus 1 squared. And that would just be 2 minus 1, and that does indeed equal 1, so we're good to go. So I just want you to kind of trust what the graphs are telling you. I think a lot of times when people look at graphs, they don't want to use them. They want to draw them, but they don't want to like believe that they have any relevant information. And again, one thing I'm trying to just stress in this course is how important graphs are and how useful they are. Okay, so these lines that we've seen so far, what do they actually represent? So these lines represent all possible solutions, or really all possible ordered pairs for a particular equation. So it can be really for any equation. So that's a very powerful thing to understand because it cuts down on math for you, right? Because if I go back to this, if I had asked you to actually figure these things out, you'd have a lot more work to do. If I said, you know, figure out what x has to be if y equals 1, that totally changes the nature of this. But if I just have the graph in front of me, it's like, oh, I just pull them out and I can just double check them and I'm good to go. So it's really handy to know that that's what these lines actually represent. And so now what I want to do is I also want to just remind you of kind of one thing with functions. We've seen this in the past, but I kind of want to just remind you of this. So there's this relationship now between functions and graphs that I'm trying to establish here. And we've done this exercise in another part of the book, but let's say that I want to evaluate what is f of -0.5. Okay, so let's see. Let's find -0.5. -0.5 is right here. So here's where the graph crosses and it has -0.5. What is this point? This is the point negative 0.5 comma 0. Okay, so what this means is that f of negative 0.5 should equal 0. But what I want to do is I want to check this. I want to actually believe this. So if I plug this in, f of negative 0.5, well, this would be 2 times negative 0.5, having some trouble, negative 0.5 plus 1. So if you actually work that out, this becomes negative 1 plus 1, so that definitely equals 0. So what this tells me is that the y value is actually standing for my f of x. So my f of x and my y, these are both interchangeable. You could almost think of this as interchangeable with y. This is kind of what we're getting out of this. So if I just read the y coordinate off of this, that is telling me the value of f of x. Okay, so let's do the next one. What about f of 0.5? Okay, so here's 0.5. So now I'm going to come up to the graph. Here's where I've got f of 0.5. So what is this point? This is 0.5 comma 2. So what is that telling me? It's telling me that f of 0.5 equals 2. And you can plug that in and confirm that on your own if you want. And then what about f of 0? So what is that? So maybe let's try that one more time. So f of 0, so here's 0 on the x-axis, and now I just come up to where this is on the graph. So this is the point 0 comma 1. So what this means then is f of 0 equals 1. So there's two ways that I can evaluate this then, right? I can actually plug the number into the function and figure this out, or I can just read it straight off the graph. And since f of x and y are kind of interchangeable, now this kind of just strengthens what I know about working with the graph. Okay, so now that we can see this clear connection kind of with the graph and functions and y, now what I want to do is I just want to do a little bit of plotting. And this just kind of is a really, really basic way of doing graphs, and we're going to really make this a lot easier on ourselves as we go on. But I just want to get you kind of used to and thinking about graphs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an equation. So we'll start with y equals, how about, I don't know, how about 2x plus 1? So what I want you to do is I want you to find a couple of points that would help you figure out the shape of this graph. So usually you can start with 3, and you can choose whatever points you want for this. So choose something that's going to be easy to plug in. My favorites are usually like -1, 0, and 1. I try to see if this is enough to figure out the shape of the graph, and then I go from there. Okay, so I'm going to go through and make my own table. And so let's see, so 2 times -1 plus 1, that equals -2 plus 1, so that equals -1. So at -1, this is -1. Then I'm going to plug in 0 into my x, so this becomes 2 times 0 plus 1. Well, that will just equal just 1, right, because it becomes 0 plus 1, so this is 1. And then the last one, I'm going to plug in 1 for x, so 2 times 1 plus 1, this will be 2 plus 1, so this equals 3. So here's my table. So I just totally randomly chose 3 points, and now I'm going to graph them. So I've got -1, 1, so let's see, -1, -1 down here, and then I've got 0, 1, so come up here, and then I've got 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I've chosen 3 points here. And so you can see, so what you want to do when you try this, first you plot the points and you see if they are something that you could just now connect together, like you can tell the shape. And to me, looking at this now, this just looks like a line, so I can just connect these together. And there you go. Now I've got, pretend that's a straight line. It's always so hard to draw when I'm under pressure. Okay, so there, that would be the graph of this. So I just want you to kind of get used to plotting a couple of points and looking at the shapes of some of these things. That's all I'm really trying to establish in this exercise. So now I want to give you something a little bit weirder, and I'll give you some hints with this one. So let's do y equals x squared plus 1. So since this one is x squared, this one's going to be a little stranger. So I'm actually going to just tell you some points to plug in for this. So I would recommend that you plug in these 5 points. Plug these in and evaluate them, and then plot them, and then see what you get. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so as I plug these in, so I've got -2. So remember, you're squaring that whole thing plus 1. So that becomes 4 plus 1. So that'll equal 5. So this is -2, 5. And then at -1, I square this. So this will be really 1 plus 1. So this equals 2. If I plug in 0, 0 squared plus 1, that just equals 1. And then what you find when you plug in 1 and 2, you get the same 2 points as before. So this should also be 2, and this should also be 5. So now I need to plot these points. So let's see, I've got -2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my first point. -1, 1, 2. 0, 1. 1, 2, and 2. Oops. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this shape is looking more like a U shape. So this is quadratic, and you might remember that those looked U-shaped anyways. So this is not surprising. So that would be the shape of this graph in this case. So you'll have a few of these like in your My Math Lab or whatever, and the point here is not for you to have like all this knowledge of how to graph them. It's just getting you to play around and getting used to graphing. We're going to spend the whole chapter really getting used to graphing. And what I have here on the next page, this is actually just a cheat sheet of like how certain equations will look and what their graphs will be shaped like. So this is just a general cheat sheet for you that might be handy as we go throughout the chapter. So notice here, if I don't have anything squared, it's a line. If I have something that's being squared, it's a parabola, so it's going to have that U shape. And then exponentials have that like curvature here. So we've talked about all this in chapter 3. Okay, so that'll wrap up this one. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.